Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on 15th of February of 2023. Today we have some updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Kupiansk Frontline. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of previous 24 hours clashes in the vicinity of Kupiansk, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-30. And furthermore, the Russians spotted and destroyed 8 commandos groups. It is very interesting and very strange because the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers on the Kupiansk front line. To tell the truth, I haven't seen such numbers of losses from the Ukrainian side since the beginning of this special military operation. What does it mean? That means that the Russians activated in this area. It is not a culmination yet, but I believe that within the next days or weeks we're going to see the culmination of clashes on the Kupiansk front line. When talking about the situation on the ground, the Russians attack 14th Mechanized Brigade in the town by the name of Dvorechная, and the Russians attack 103rd Brigade, Territory Defense Brigade, in the vicinity of Kotlarovka. And also the Russians destroyed 6 commandos, but without any changes on the ground. Some Russian sources are saying that the Russians managed to enter Sinkovka and that they're doing right now or finishing the clearing operation of this town. I believe that we can trust this information, and I think that within the next few days we're going to receive more updates about this small village Sinkovka that located on the north of Kupiansk. Okay, we understand the situation in Kupiansk. Some sources are saying that the Russians started, it's like the beginning or the first phase of greatest Russian offensive operation. First they need to clear the vicinity of Kupiansk and so on. But when talking about the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, and today I will try to point this information as much as possible, they reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost 6 armored vehicles. But the thing is that the Ukrainians haven't lost even a single tank on this front line. Furthermore, I would like to say that the destroying of the tanks is the real thing for the Russians. I mean, I'm trying to say that this is a real thing, that this is a real achievement. When talking about the first, second, the third phases of this special operation, the Russians almost every single day include information about destroyed tanks and so on. But when talking about the last months, the Russians haven't included much information about destroyed tanks from the Ukrainian side. It can mean a lot. It can mean a lot. First of all, it can mean that the Ukrainians are no longer have tanks, or the number and quality of their tanks is very poor. But from the other side, this information can say us that the Ukrainians are trying to save and to collect tanks as much as possible before the upcoming greatest Ukrainian offensive operation. We'll see, but this is very interesting information. Now let's talk about Liman front line. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to destroy and got 65 Ukrainian soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. The Russians got 2 Gvozdika howitzers and another Grad. Furthermore, when talking about another 6 armored vehicles, the Russians are saying that they haven't attacked or destroyed even a single tank on the Liman front line. So as you can see, when talking about the north area, about the Kupiansk and Liman front lines, that means we're talking about the north part of special military operation. The Russians during the previous 24 hours haven't managed to destroy even a single tank. And if you are able to follow the reports of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation for the previous days, you're gonna see that the Russians are not very rich for these numbers. Yes, they're destroying armored vehicles according to the reports, but mainly it's just the infantry, armored vehicles, or some kind of vehicles and so on. There are not much numbers about tanks, and this is very important. I believe that Ukrainians do have tanks. They are trying to collect or keep them in Kharkiv and Chuguyev. I believe that these days they're trying to restore and to increase the quality of these tanks or something like this before the upcoming greatest offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they managed to destroy one ammo depot on the Kupiansk-Liman front line. But also, when talking about this area, there are no changes on the ground. If you take a look at deployment map, you're gonna also see very interesting updates. First of all, the Ukrainians deployed their Free Corps volunteer unit, as deployment map calls this brigade, this unit, on the Kupiansk front line. Furthermore, when talking about the Liman front line, you're gonna see that 95th Air Assault Brigade were deployed in the vicinity of Tarskoye. What does it mean? First of all, when talking about, if you take a look at the Western sources map, at the Russian sources map, or deployment map, you're gonna see that there is every single map shows this small bag, this like the real direction of the Russian attack from Kremenaya in direction of Zarechno or Tarskoye. Every single map shows this progress. Let's take a look at the Western sources map. Maybe this map shows the same progress, but it's like the last, but the same direction. And this is the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy or to make the main base of 95th Brigade, this air assault, in the vicinity of Tarskoye, with the one purpose: to slow down or to stop the Russians, because they understand if the Russians are able to get these lakes, then these lakes can serve them as a natural barrier. They will be able to short the front line, and then they will be able to split their army and to send one part to the north and to start storming of Makeivka and Nevskaya, and the second one will be turned to the south, and they will start offensive operation in direction of Yampol. So this is the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to reinforce the area near Tarskoye with air assault brigade, just to slow down the Russians. But when talking about the north part, as you can see, the Ukrainians redeployed their Free Corps volunteer unit. This is some kind of national battalion, as you can see according to their icon, their logo of their battalion. This is national battalion that loves everything that Ukrainians and hates everything that Russians. And I believe that this is some kind of anti-retreat forces. As you can see, as a result of clashes on the Kupiansk front line, as a result of clashes on Bakhmut, Ugledar front lines, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy, as you remember, 80th Air Assault Air Brigade and many other parts of other brigades from Kupiansk to the south, and that's why they have decreased the power of their army on the Kupiansk front line. And the Russians took a decision to use this advantage, to use this thing, and started their own offensive operation. And of course, as you can see, the losses from the Ukrainian side were increased since that time. So that means that there is a very high possibility that Ukrainian forces will take a decision by themselves to retreat because they are scared or nobody wants to die or something like this. And the Russians are planning to use this situation in their favor. So I believe that this is the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to deploy this national battalion as anti-retreat forces. That main job and goal is to stop the Ukrainian retreat or panic on the front lines. And this is a very interesting bell when talking about the Kupiansk front line. Now let's move to the south and let's talk about Siversk front line. There are no changes on the Siversk front line at all. The Russians are pushing in direction of Fedorovka, Razdolovka, Veselaya, Spornaya, Belogorovka, but without any changes on the ground. The head of Wagner's, Prigozhin, reported that his words is that almost every single day the Ukrainians are moving more and more reserves in the vicinity in Bakhmut. From 300 to 500 soldiers arrive every single day in this area. So the Ukrainians they don't count their losses. They're moving more and more power to stop the Russians and to stabilize the front line in front of Slaviansk. If you take a look at Bakhmut, as you can see, there are a lot of icons, but the most important is that there is an icon above Chasov Yar, and if you're familiar with the Russians, with the Russian language, you're gonna see that this icon means that Ukrainians started evacuation process of Chasov Yar. They're not evacuating the civilians or population. The Ukrainians started evacuation process of authorities, of buildings, of documents, of archive, and so on. I believe that they understand that sooner or later Chasov Yar, Bakhmut is going to fall, and of course they need to save the papers, they need to move the administration, the authorities. So this is the regular situation. When you don't know what to do, the only thing you can do is to save the papers and documents. So this is exactly what the Ukrainian authorities in Chasov Yar are doing these days. Nothing special, just the regular situation. But anyway, from the other side, we understand that Ukrainians in their minds, they are ready to step back from Bakhmut, and they are ready to start, or to maybe even also to step back from Chasov Yar as well. Furthermore, when talking about the entire Donetsk front line, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 190 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. And one more thing. The Ukrainians, according to the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, they haven't lost even a single tank since during the previous 24 hours on this front line. So we can say that from Kupiansk, till, let's say, Ugledar, so this is a very long front line, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians haven't lost even a single tank. And this is a very important update. This is very interesting information, because I don't have information what is going on with the Ukrainian tanks. And now, at least before the greatest Russian offensive operation, or before the Ukrainian greatest offensive operation, or before the Ukrainians are going to receive the help from the Western countries, it is very important and very interesting to understand how many tanks the Ukrainians still have. And if we are talking about the numbers that the Russian Ministry of Defense provides, I believe that the Ukrainians don't have tanks on the front lines at all. They took a decision or to restore them, or they don't have them. So maybe this is the reason why the Western countries took a decision to start supplying Ukraine with the tanks, because maybe they don't have one. And if you don't have tanks, that means that you are no longer able to do any offensive operation. Yes, when talking about the of Kharkiv counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side, the main job was done by the armored vehicles and so on. But if the Ukrainians didn't have tanks during that operation, believe me, they wouldn't risk and wouldn't start any offensive operation in this area. Anyway, no matter what we're talking about, no matter about the situation on the front lines, tanks is the most important weapon. And when talking about the special military operation, this artillery and the tanks is the most important part, because tanks is armor that it is very difficult to destroy and shut down. Of course, Western countries and the Russians have a lot of weapons to destroy tanks, but as you can see, according to the numbers, it is not an easy job, and the Ukrainians are not losing tanks these days. This is very interesting. Furthermore, as you can see, one more time, the Ukrainian lost 190 soldiers. What does it mean? That means that these days is the culmination of the battle for Donetsk. As I told you, maybe the next few days we are going to see a very big numbers of Ukrainian losses, but in a week I believe that these losses will be reduced, because the battle, sooner or later, this battle is going to be finished. I don't think that Ukrainians are suicide guys, or the Russians. Nobody is going to, ruin or reduce the entire army in some Bakhmut. I believe that everybody has own things or lines, red lines that they're not planning to cross. And now the thing is, who is going to reach this red line faster, the Russians or the Ukrainians? I believe that Ukrainians is the party who's going to reach this red line faster than the Russians, and they will take a decision to step back from Bakhmut and from Donetsk front line. Furthermore, when talking about yesterday, the Russians reported that Ukrainians lost just 60 soldiers when talking about yesterday. And about today, 190 soldiers. The day before yesterday, 150 soldiers. What does it mean? First of all, the day before yesterday, the Russians reported that they established final control over Krasnaya Gora, and also they report about this 150 losses among the manpower of Ukrainian side. So these two things are completely correlated and they are connected between each other. I believe that this is the reason of the heavy loss from the Ukrainian side, because the Russians managed to create the final push and they managed to complete the mission of taking Krasnaya Gora. Yesterday, mainly were concentrated on clearing operation, so that's why the losses from the Ukrainian side were so low. And today the Russians, I believe that maybe yesterday in the evening they complete the clearing operation, and today in the morning or something like this, they started one more time greatest offensive operation on the north part of Bakhmut, or maybe on some other front lines, and this is the reason why the loss from the Ukrainian side have been increased so much, 3 times in comparison with the previous day. Furthermore, today the Russians reported one more time, it's the second time in the row when the Russians start providing reports from Avdiivka front line. As you can see, the Russians continue moving in direction of Novobakhmutovka. Today the Russians published a small icon on the north of Novoselovka Drugaya, this one with the description that the Russians managed to establish control over the hill in this area. But if you take a look at the Institute of Study of War map, you're gonna see that this is Novobakhmutovka, and there is just one hill, this one 234 meters, and this hill is located a little bit further to the north than the Russians sources map shows. This one, and this hill is located a little bit to the north. I believe that the Russians, if they provided this information, I believe that they knew what they were talking about. So I believe that the Russians control a bigger bridgehead that it is shown on this map. I believe that the Russians got as close as possible to Novobakhmutovka, and something tells me that within the next few days we're going to see the collapse of Novobakhmutovka, because the Russians control the landfill or the hill on the south of this town, and now they can control, or they are able to establish high control over this over this intersection, and they can control the entire supply and support of Novobakhmutovka. This town is very important, but the question is which further Russian operation requires control over Novobakhmutovka. When talking about Avdiivka, yes, this is very important to have this town to establish control along the road N20, but when this town is more important for the Russians when talking about New York and Toretsk agglomeration clashes and battle for this town. So I believe that these days we're the witnesses of started offensive operation or encirclement operation or New York and Toretsk agglomeration. Now let's move to the south Donetsk front line. There are not much changes. There are still a lot of icons and so on. I believe you saw videos published by the Western sources of destroyed flamethrower system TOS-1A in the vicinity of Nikolska. Yes, this is true, and some sources are saying that the Russians lost since the beginning of the special operation up to 6 or 7 flamethrower systems of this model. Not much. The Russians tries to save and to keep these systems in safe and not to allow the Ukrainians to destroy them. These very powerful systems, and the most important negative side of these systems is that the Russians are able to use them, that the distance of their attack is less than 6 kilometers. That means that they need to get very close to the front line, and from this perspective the Ukrainians are able to spot these systems with just regular drones to give an order to their artillery systems, and then it's just a job and question of professionality of this or that artillery systems that supports the Ukrainians in Ugledar. And if you take a look at the deployment map, we remember that this week the Ukrainians deployed 55th Artillery Brigade in the vicinity of Ugledar and 15th Artillery Recon Brigade in vicinity of Ugledar. So that means that there are no more problems from Ukrainian side, but when talking about the artillery support, they have a lot of artillery systems, they have very nice support, and to tell the truth, I can't give you any projections about further situation in Ugledar, because it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are able to penetrate this area or not. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost just 60 soldiers in the vicinity of Ugledar, 7 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems, 1 D-20 howitzer and another D-30 howitzer. Now let's move to Kherson Frontline. During the previous 24 hours, there were very heavy clashes, but the Russians reported that as a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost just 1 Grad and 2 Gvozdika howitzers in this area. I believe that that's it. This is the whole situation on the ground during the previous 24 hours. I believe that situation on the ground is very important, but I also understand that these days one of the most important update is the 21st of February, 22nd of February and 24th of February. This is the days, this is anniversary of start of the beginning of special military operation. As you know, the President of Russian Federation are planning to start his greatest speech on the 21st of February. People just can imagine or what Putin is going to tell us on this evening, on this event. Nobody knows. People are trying to project. Some sources are saying that Putin is going to declare war, or maybe Putin is going to change the status of special operation. Some sources are saying that Putin is going to, I don't know, to announce about another mobilization process and so on. But I believe that Putin is going to respond to the Western countries, to their decision to start supplying Ukraine with tanks. You know that it's a game, mainly this political game, and that means that this is the game on the paper. So of course, when talking about the tanks and when talking about armored vehicles, this is not the tanks on the paper. The Ukrainians is going to receive these armored vehicles. But when talking about Russian Federation, I believe that they want to increase to the level of this game, and I believe that the Russians are going to use this situation to bluff a little bit. If you ask me, if I were the president of Russian Federation, what would I do? Of course, I would ask permission from the parliament of Russian Federation to use nuclear bomb on, let's say, the territory of another country. They are not planning to call the real titles or the real names or the real towns. The Putin is going just to ask permission. Could you let me to use our nuclear weapon on the territory of other countries for, let's say, to situation to save the Russian Federation or something like this? It's not, the Russians are not going to use the nuclear weapon, at least this week or the next week. But they would need to bluff and they need to start some kind of another game. They want to increase the level of this game and so on. Furthermore, another thing, I suppose maybe the Russians are going to also to ask the Parliament of Russian Federation a permission to, let's say, to call Russian ally to join this special operation. Maybe this is another thing that Putin is going to ask during this event or meeting or something like this. Why I'm thinking about this? First of all, on the 22nd of February, the Russian parliament is going to have an extra meeting. So they're planning to have an extra meeting the next day after the speech of Putin. So that means that everything is already planned, everything is already prepared, every single document is already prepared. The only thing, they need to play this show, to show this cinema, this film by the name of, I don't know, the anniversary of special military operation. Everybody has its own role or something like this. The first step is the speech of president. The next day the parliament is going to have a meeting. I believe they are going to adopt some laws. Furthermore, some of my friends, some of the members of Military Summary Channel, today they reported and they gave me information that the president of north of Abkhazia and the South Ossetia, this is the regions of Georgia that were taken by the Russians on the war of 2008. Not taken, but the Russians entered this area as a result of special operation in 2008, and the President Vladimir Putin is going to have meetings with the president of these two territories, of these two regions. Maybe another possible situation, maybe the Russians took a decision to take these territories as a part of Russian Federation, North Ossetia and Abkhazia. I can't tell you, but anyway, one more time, everybody in the Western countries and the Russians are playing and trying to increase the temperature of this game. I hope that we are not going to see the nuclear collapse, but we see what we see, and I believe and I hope that nothing terrible is going to happen as a result of these things. And don't forget that on the 24th of September we're going to see another meeting in Poland with Joe Biden and the Poland president and president of Ukraine. They're also planning to do something, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine announced that the Russians are going to remember the 24th of February forever and for ages, because he's saying that the Ukrainians are planning to do something on this anniversary. We'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to do something or not, but anyway, starting from the 20th of February till the 25th of February, I believe these days are going to be the hottest day since the beginning of the special operation, because everybody wants to show their power, they want to show the progress, they want to show that they are the party who are winning this special operation these days, and they are the bosses or something like this. So let's see. Let's hope that nothing terrible or horrible is going to happen during these days. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.